When they hear the gospel, here's what needs to happen. The mind needs to be engaged, the heart needs to be involved, and the will needs to be brought to that decision. Because when they hear the gospel, the mind might say, you know what? I know I need to do this. Then the heart gets engaged and says, you know what? I want to do this. I know I need to do it, and I want to do it. But the will must be brought to this, where they actually do it. Because the just shall live by faith, but faith must have a beginning. And for anyone to become a Christian, there must come a moment in time when they rest their whole hope for eternity on Jesus Christ. It happened on the 20th of January, 1978 for me. I knew the gospel. I had consented to the truth of the gospel in my mind, but the heart and the will was absent. And God in His grace brought me to a place of decision, where what I knew to be true and what I knew I needed to do, I now wanted to do, and that night I did it. Around about 8:45, I consciously consented to the truth of the gospel. I believed in my heart that Jesus Christ was my only ticket to heaven, and I brought my will to bear upon that decision. I knelt down and asked Jesus to forgive me. And I believe that night I crossed the line from death unto life. And I believe that that night sealed the fact that I will never come into condemnation. Have you crossed that line? Have you made that decision? Do you believe? Because if you don't believe, you're going to be condemned. Lost for all eternity. Banished from the presence of God. Consigned to the place of outer darkness. Oh, my friend, you need to decide. I like the story of the English evangelist J. John, who tells of a wedding. And the minister who's officiating turns to the groom and he says, will you take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife? To which the groom replies, well, I've been thinking actually. And the minister looks at him and goes, well, that's interesting. That's good that you're thinking actually, but I've got a question. Will you? To which the groom replies, well, I get very excited when I think about her. And by this stage, the minister's getting rather exasperated, and he says, well, I'm very glad that you get excited when you think about her, but the question I'm asking you is, will you? And eventually the guy says, I will. The minister turns to the bride, and he says this, will you take this idiot to be your lawful wedded husband? To which I assume she said, I will. But listen, all jokes aside, to a very serious application. There are people, when it comes to Jesus Christ, who have heard the gospel and say, you know, I've been thinking actually. And they're thinking with their head and their mind. And they may even been stirred in the heart as they look at other Christians and see what that's done for them and the joy and the peace they have. And they've heard a gospel minister share their soul in their sermon and they've been stirred. But you know what, folks? Will you? That's the issue. You can think about Christ. You can even be stirred to move in His direction, but will you move in His direction? Will you believe? Will you commit? Will you repent? It needs to happen today. Because if you don't believe, you're condemned. That's what Jesus says. And when you and I share the gospel, we've got to share it with the desire for a verdict.